The hatch to the stasis booth zazunged open, and a green "Exit Now" sign flashed on and off above Lister's head. Holly's digitalized face appeared on the 8-foot square wall monitor. "It is now safe for you to emerge from stasis." "I only just got in." "Please proceed to the drive room for debriefing." Holly's face melted into the smooth greyness of the blank screen. "But I only just got in," insisted Lister. He walked down the empty corridor towards the express lift. What was that smell? A musty smell, like an old attic. He knew that smell. It was just like the smell of his grandmother's cellar. He'd never noticed it before. And what was that noise? A kind of hissing buzz. The air conditioning? Why could he hear the air conditioning? He'd never heard it before. He suddenly realized it wasn't what he was hearing that was odd. It was what he wasn't hearing. Apart from the white noise of the air conditioning, there was no other sound, just the lonely squeals of his rubber soles on the corridor floor. And there was dust everywhere, curious mounds of white dust lying in random patterns. "Where is everybody?" Holly projected his face onto the floor in front of Lister. "They're dead, Dave," he said solemnly. "Who is?" asked Lister absently. Softly. "Everybody, Dave." "What?" Lister smiled. "Everybody's dead, Dave." "What? Everybody?" "Yes, everybody's dead, Dave." "What? Peterson?" "Yes, they're all dead. Everybody is dead, Dave." "Burroughs?" Holly sighed. "Everybody is dead, Dave." "Selby?" "Yes." "Not Chen?" "Golden Bennett," Holly snapped. "Yes, Chen. Everybody's dead, Dave." "Even the captain?" "Yes, everybody." Lister squeaked along the corridor. A tick in his left cheek pulled his face into staccato smiles. He wanted to laugh. Everybody was dead. Why did he want to laugh? No, they couldn't all be dead. Not everybody. Not literally everybody. What about Rimmy? "He's dead, Dave. Everybody is dead. Everybody is dead, Dave. Dave, everybody is dead." Holly tried all 4 words in every possible permutation, with every possible inflection, finishing with, "Dead, Dave, everybody is. Everybody is, Dave, dead." Lister looked blankly in no particular direction, while his face struggled to find an appropriate expression. "Wait," he said after a while. "Are you telling me everybody's dead?" Holly rolled his eyes and nodded. The enormous drive room echoed with silence. The banks of computers on autopilot whirred about their business. "Holly?" Lister's small voice resonated in the giant chamber. "What are these piles of dust?" The dust lay on the floors, on chairs, everywhere, all arranged in small, neat dunes. Lister dipped his finger in one and tasted it. "That," said Holly from his huge screen, "is console executive Imran Sanchez." Lister's tongue hung guiltily from his mouth, and he wiped the white particles which had once formed part of flight coordinator Imran Sanchez onto his jacket cuff. "So, what happened?" Holly told him about the cadmium-2 radiation leak, how the crew had been wiped out within seconds, how he'd headed the ship pell-mell out of the solar system to avoid spreading nuclear contamination, and how he'd had to keep Lister in stasis until the radiation had reached a safe background level. "So, how long did you keep me in stasis?" 3 million years, said Holly as casually as he could. Lister acted as if he hadn't heard. 3 million years? It had no meaning. If it had been 30 years, he would have thought, "What a long time." But 3 million years? 3 million years was just stupid. He wandered over to the chair opposite the console he'd seen Kachansky operate. "So, Chrissy's dead?" he said, staring at the hummock of dust. I always... His voice tailed away. He tried to remember her face. He tried to remember the pinball smile. Well, if it's any consolation, said Holly, if she had survived, the age difference would be insurmountable. I mean, you're 24, she's 3 million. It takes a lot for a relationship with that kind of age gap to work. Lister wasn't listening. I always thought we'd get back together. I had this sort of plan that one day I'd have enough money to buy a farm on Fiji. There's cheap land there, and in a half-assed kind of way, I always pictured she'd be there with me. This was getting morbid. Holly tried to lighten the atmosphere. Well, he said, she wouldn't be much use to you on Fiji now. No, said Lister. Not unless it snowed, said Holly. And you needed something to grit the path with. Lister screwed up his face in distaste. Holly! Sorry. I've been on my own for 3 million years. I'm just used to saying what I think. For some time now, well, the last 200,000 years to be exact, Holly had grown increasingly concerned about himself. For a computer with an IQ of 6,000, it seemed to him he was behaving in a more and more erratic way. In fact, he'd long suspected he'd gone a bit peculiar. Just as a bachelor who spends too much time on his own gradually develops quirks and eccentricities, so a computer who spends 3 million years alone in deep space can get, well, set in his ways, become quirky, go a little bit odd. Holly decided not to burden Lister with this anxiety, and hoped his oddness would eventually sort itself out, now he had a bit of company. Another slight concern, which he tried to put to the back of his ram, was that for a computer with an IQ of 6,000, there was a rather alarming amount of knowledge he seemed to have forgotten. It wasn't, on the whole, important things, but was nevertheless fairly disturbing. He knew, for instance, that Isaac Newton was a famous physicist, but he couldn't remember why. He couldn't remember the capital of Luxembourg. He could recall pi to 30,000 digits, but he couldn't say for absolute certain whether port was on the left side and starboard on the right, or whether it was the other way round. Who knocked Swansea City out of the FA Cup in 1967? He used to know. It was a mystery now. Obviously, none of this missing information was absolutely vital for the smooth running of a mining ship 3 million years out into deep space. But technically, he was supposed to know more or less everything, and frankly, there were some worrying gaps. He could remember, for instance, that in the Second Impression, 1959 publication of Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov, printed in Great Britain by the Shenval Press, London, Hertford and Harrow, page 60 was far and away the dirtiest page. But was Nabokov German or Russian? It totally eluded him. Maybe it wasn't important. Of course it wasn't important. Still, it was for Holly a source of perturbation. It's a source of perturbation, he thought. Then he wondered whether there was such a word as perturbation, or whether he just made it up. He didn't know that either. Oh, it was hopeless. Lister sat in the empty Copacabana Hawaiian cocktail bar and poured a triple whiskey into his double whiskey, then topped it up with a whiskey. Absently, he lit the filter end of a cigarette and tried to assimilate all the information Holly had thrown at him. Everybody was dead. Everybody. He'd been in stasis 3 million years. 3 million years. Since one drunken night outside the Mary Lloyd off Regent Street, London, every step he'd taken had led him further and further from home. First it was Mimas, then Miranda, and now he was 3 million years away. 3 million years out into deep space, further than any human being had ever been before. And he was totally alone. The enormity of all this was slowly beginning to sink in when Holly dropped his final bombshell, the one about the human race being extinct. What do you mean, extinct? Well, 3 million years is a very good age for a species. I mean, your average genus only survives a couple of 100,000 years max.
And that's with a clean living species like dinosaurs. Dinosaurs didn't totally screw up the environment. They just went around quietly eating things. And even then, they didn't get to clock up the big 1 mil. So the chances of the human race making it to the big 3000000 are practically non-existent. So I'm afraid you just have to face up to the very real possibility that your species is dead.
Much to his surprise, Lister had to let out a sob.
Were you very close?
Holly tilted his head sympathetically.
Well, yeah. I suppose you must have been, really.
That was a bit of an odd thing to say, he thought. Lister took out his shirt tail and blew his nose. So, I'm the last human being alive?
Yeah. You never think it's going to happen to your species, do you? It's always something that happens to somebody else's.
Lister spent the next 5 days going to pieces. There seemed little point in getting dressed, and so he wandered around naked, swigging from a bottle of whiskey. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know if there was anything to do. And worst of all, he didn't much care. He slept wherever he fell, a painful, dreamless sleep. He hardly ate and drank a small lock worth of whiskey. He didn't even like whiskey, but beer was too cumbersome to carry around in sufficient quantities to achieve oblivion. He lost a stone in weight and started shouting at people who weren't there. Every evening at around 5 p.m, he'd stagger stark naked into the drive room, and waving his whiskey bottle dangerously in the air, he'd belch incoherent obscenities at Holly's huge visage on the gigantic monitor screen. Sometimes Lister imagined he'd heard the phone ring, and he'd rush to pick it up. On the evening of the 5th day, as he staggered through the Red Dwarf shopping mall, toasting invisible crowds, he keeled over and blacked out. When he woke up in the medical unit, a man with an H on his forehead was looking down at him with undisguised contempt.